Hey guys, Dustin here once again with another episode of Horroritis, and today we are doing another indie review. It's indie review time again, and today we are looking at Tales of Frankenstein, written and directed by Donald F. Glut, based on some short stories also written by Donald F. Glut. This anthology doesn't follow the monster or the doctor, but descendants of the doctor throughout various periods in time, and surprise, surprise, they're all up to the same shenanigans. It must be genetic. The first segment is called My Creation, My Beloved, and it's probably the closest thing we get to a traditional Frankenstein story in the whole movie. This one follows a descendant of Frankenstein as he's trying to create the perfect vessel to house the brain of the woman he loved. I like this story. It had a good twist. It was a little exposition heavy right out the gate, but to be fair, there was a lot of stuff to get across in a short period of time, and I think this was probably just the easiest way to get to the story, even if it may not have been the best. Our protagonist in this story has a connection at the morgue who calls him up anytime any good bodies turn up, and this guy, you can tell, is supposed to be our comic relief character. He's, always cracking jokes and doing the eating food over the dead bodies thing that we see coroners and medical examiners doing all over TV and movies. I feel like this character probably would have been better served in a full-length movie instead of a 25-minute short. I'm not saying he's a bad character, we just don't get a lot of time to understand who he is or where he's coming from, and a lot of times that makes him come across as kind of a jerk. The protagonist himself I thought was pretty well done. I think they hit most of the emotional points, which made him sympathetic to us, which in turn made the ending a lot more impactful. All in all, I think this was a good start to the movie. The second segment is called Crawler from the Grave, and this one actually focuses on the neighbor of a descendant of Frankenstein, and this neighbor is obsessed with jewelry and jewels and stuff, and Frankenstein has a ring that this guy is totally in love with, and when Frankenstein dies, the neighbor contacts his wife to try to get the ring, only to find out that Frankenstein was buried with it, so the neighbor decides to do a little grave robbing. While not the best segment in the film, it's still a pretty solid story. I just think the departure from making monsters makes this thing feel like less of a Frankenstein story than it really is. Still, a good segment. The next segment is called Madhouse of Death, and this one I think is where we hit peak weird, and probably this one feels the least like a Frankenstein story out of all of them. This one is a hard-boiled detective story where the detective ends up in the house of a mad scientist and his pet gorilla. This one is probably my least favorite out of all of them. It takes that trope of the hard-boiled detective narrating everything and takes it a little too far, so we end up with a lot of people just standing around staring at each other while we're waiting for the voiceover to end. I don't know if it was supposed to be like that, but it's a little bit off-putting. Also, if you're bothered by typical racial stereotypes, the African headhunter Mogambo and his interactions with the detective might not rub you the right way. Now, I understand that what we see here is meant to make the detective come across as kind of an asshole, and for the time period that this story takes place in, these conversations weren't a big deal. Just take a look at the old Tarzan movies, it's that level stuff, so it's not really important to me. It didn't bother me a whole lot. There's nothing really super offensive here. It's not like the detectives running around dropping hard R's all over the place, but it can be a little bit tone deaf. There are some other things done in the name of comedy that I just can't be mad at, like an Asian woman named Anime. Not the best joke in the movie, but I chuckled. I don't care. Light up the comments if you want. Dr. Karnstein's creation is the last segment in this movie and probably my favorite. It's a descendant of Frankenstein named Dr. Karnstein, and he's picking up Frankenstein's work, only this time in Romania, and we all know what Romania is known for, right? Right? It's vampires. Honestly, I wish this story had been fleshed out into a full-length movie. There's a lot of places to go with this story, and I think the premise is really, really good. I wish it was longer. I wish they would have done more with it. I think they probably could have. And maybe someday somebody will take this idea and make a full-length movie out of it. I would totally check that out. All in all, Tales of Frankenstein is a fun watch. Sure, it's got its low-budget issues like all of the indie movies do, where some of the sets are just a little too obviously constructed, and some of the dialogue is stilted, and some of the actresses were definitely not hired for their acting abilities, and nobody seems to have the accent for the place and period in which the story is set. Although I do realize that that last point matters almost to nobody except me, because I'm a giant nerd about those things. I would recommend this one to anybody who likes Frankenstein stories or isn't afraid to try something different. This was a fun watch, and like so many of the indie movies that seem to be popping up in my reviews, this one has Mel Novak in it. I'm kind of starting to suspect that I'm just dealing with Mel Novak. Just over and over, he's just sending me movies. I don't hate that. So that's my review of Tales of Frankenstein. If you like this video, give it a like, subscribe, do whatever you need to do. We are on YouTube, Facebook, and BitChute. Check us out there. I also show up on Twitter sometimes, just not a lot. So as always, I'm Dustin, this was Horroritis, and until next time, keep a safe distance. Don't make anybody sick.